Are we on the right week? Okay, so last week we left off at the end of Genesis chapter 40 with the finishing up of Joseph interpreting the dreams for the butler and the baker. And he asked the butler if he would help him when he was set free, because he felt very confident in God's answer to his dreams interpretation. And that's kind of where we left off. So let's go back to the very end of 40:23. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So the minute he got set free, he didn't do anything about it, didn't talk about Joseph to anybody. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. So 2 full years have passed. Joseph seeing his dreams just fly out the window, right? Poor guy, he was so kind to help the chief butler, and this is where it left off for him. He's just still in prison. The chief butler did not remember Joseph, but instead forgot him. It's been 2 full years since the butler was set free. Some would say he shouldn't have even asked the butler for help, like he wasn't depending on God. That's what some commentators have said some people would say. But the truth is, it doesn't matter, it doesn't hurt to ask for help, even from somebody who is not God's person, so to speak. Just because you're God's person doesn't mean you can't get help from someone who's not.
But everything that the Bible tells us is that we're supposed to rely on each other and support each other and be a family together, so that
Right.
it would be natural.
Right, but if they say because the butler was Egyptian and not God's people, you shouldn't ask them for help either. You should just try to do it on your own or wait for God. But that's not the right thinking. That's very odd thinking. It shouldn't matter if God uses someone like the butler to get you out. That's who God uses. So it doesn't hurt to ask. There's no reason you can't ask.
The Bible even says that he used Pharaoh.
Right, and actually I was going to say that in a little bit. It's okay. It's okay. But the thing we have to remember is no matter how you think you might get help for a situation or a problem, you have to remember you can't depend upon men. Men will let you down. Men will fail you at times. I'm not talking about men. I'm just saying mankind. Men may fail you, yes. People, humans, there's maybe the better word. Humans will fail you because they're humans. They have a sinful nature. And they have their own, especially if they're lost. A lot of people have their own agendas. And you may not fit into what's on their plans. So just remember that. Don't get your hopes so caught up in Susie's going to help you get out of your problem. Susie may not. And don't depend on that person so strongly. Depend on God. Let him figure it out for you. It is only God we can truly depend on. So it was okay that he asked the butler, but he shouldn't have put all his hopes in that. So.
But did he put all his hopes on that?
I was going to say the same thing.
It doesn't say that, but I'm saying as a point, sometimes we have a problem. We think that, somebody's going to bail us out. That may not be our answer. God may have a totally... No, not Joseph. I wouldn't.
There was a joke that I think Pastor told several years ago. I don't remember who told it. But about a man in a flood and was on a rooftop. And God sent this person and God sent that person. Sent this other person and he died. And he asked God, he said, why didn't you save me? He said, well, I sent and I sent and I sent.
And you didn't take up the offer. Yeah, God will use people to help us. We just got to be paying attention. Don't just think it's going to be some miraculous way off the roof. It may have been the guy in the rowboat rowing by that was supposed to help you. Yeah, what's funny is one of the books that I'm reading actually brought up that illustration. Yeah, they actually brought up that same. I read that. I go, oh yeah, well that's very true, But you may use someone just like that, and you missed it.
God uses anything and everything that suits
Right.
his purpose.
Right. Yeah, and I don't see Joseph crying about it, sitting around the prison crying about it either, because he seems like he's a pretty on target guy. He seems to know He's got some intelligence. He's got a good relationship with God. He's gotten him this far. It's just more of a advice for us, is why I bring it up. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Your basket may have a hole in it. Yes, Carolyn, that's advice for you. Personally. So here are some verses about trusting God. Yeah. Psalm 118, 8 through 9. It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in princes. So it doesn't matter who they are, right? Whether they're rich and mighty and get you out of trouble, that doesn't make any difference. And then Psalm 146, 3 through 5. Do not put your trust in princes, nor in a son of man in whom there is no help. His spirit departs, he returns to his earth, in that very day his plans perish. So we may put all our hopes in our plans, and it's just null and void. I know I've had different plans over the years that haven't panned out, and it can lead to disappointment. When God had a totally different plan, different path or thing for, that was supposed to come to pass. Oh, yeah, exactly. That's right. Happy is he who has God of Jacob for his help, whose hope is in the Lord his God. That's our best way right there. And then Psalm 147, 10 through 11. He does not delight in the strength of horse. He takes no pleasure in the legs of a man. The Lord takes pleasure in those who fear him, in those who hope in his mercy. So it's God's mercy that gets us out of a lot of our issues. So as Pam was bringing up earlier, that there's a lot of people that help us in life that are not who we would expect. And we saw in Joseph's case, this happened many times. We saw in chapter 37, it was his bad big half brothers. We may not have seen it as them throwing him in a pit and then selling him into slavery, but it was God's plan, and it was a way to keep him on the path.
And it was a good plan.
Yeah, it was just different than what Joseph would have expected. Potiphar's wife. Who would ever thought that God would use Potiphar's wife to keep Joseph on the path he was supposed to be on? And then now this last chapter in 40, where we saw the butler, the baker, the prison overseer, the man who was in charge of the prison, who got Joseph the cushier job of taking care of everything. Those are all people that God used in like the prison section of his life to move him along in God's plan. So you're going to see that, that it doesn't matter. God's going to use who he wants in your life.
I think that by putting Joseph as overseer of the prison, it was a training ground, so that he could manage the entire Egypt, because he was captive at 17.
Right.
And so he probably didn't know a whole lot about taking care of everything, but God put him exactly where he needed to be.
Well, I think he did in different levels, because when he was 17, his dad put him in charge of the family business, basically. You're in charge of your brothers, you're in charge of the sheep, you're in charge of whatever. Then he moved on to slavery at Potiphar's house, which was another level of management skills. And then in the prison, he had management skills as well. So everything was a training ground. And they all taught him patience. And boy, you need that when you're in management. You need some patience, right? So let's go on to the next part of our story in 41, where we're going to see the next two people that are going to help Joseph along the path that God has for him. So Genesis 41, 1b, because we already read 1a, that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine-looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking and fat cows. Apparently they were on a carnivorous diet. Gave up the grass. So Pharaoh awoke. He slept and dreamed a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. So, who is do you think is going to be the first person that's going to probably end up helping Joseph in that passage? Pharaoh? The butler, baker's dead. So there's two people right here that are going to end up helping Joseph along his path, is what we're talking about, the different people that are come along and help. But you wouldn't think Pharaoh, if anybody, would be someone to help a slave inside a prison, like one of the lowest positions you could be in. But he's going to help. And there's a principle that was taught in Proverbs 21. Oh, I skipped a screen. Proverbs 21:1. It says, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord like the rivers of water. He turns it wherever he wishes. And here God's going to use these dreams to turn Pharaoh's heart, to turn him to the direction he needs to go so that he can help Joseph. So it's kind of a weird turn of events, because who would ever think this would happen? This has to be a God-ordained thing. This dream came from God, or these two strange dreams came from God. And the king's heart, or anyone's, that could be you or me, is in the hand of the Lord. Like the rivers of water, he turns it wherever he wishes. So this is something important to remember. God can use dreams to turn Pharaoh's heart in the direction he needs it. He can turn our leaders' hearts, whether it's our governor or mayor or our president, any of the world leaders, any of our military leaders. He can turn their hearts in the direction he wants. And it brings me to thought that this is funny, this happened this week, that Thursday is the National Day of Prayer, which is a day we focus on praying for our leaders, praying for our military leaders, praying for different people in charge. Sometimes there's different focuses. That's kind of the focus this year for the National Day of Prayer. So I wanted to remind you, take time to pray at some point. We're not having an organized time here at the church or out in the community that I know of. No one said anything. We're gone, unfortunately, to doctors out of town all day. So we couldn't plan anything here. But I want to remind you to take time to pray Thursday, whether it's on your lunch break or at dinner, before you go to work or at home, all throughout the day. Pray for your leaders, because just like he can use dreams to turn Pharaoh in the right direction, he can turn our leaders in the right direction. He may take pity on us and have mercy on us by answering our prayers and work in the lives of our leaders. So please try to remember to pray this Thursday about that. There have been many nations turned around just because one person started praying. I love the stories of the great spiritual awakenings that have happened in the past. And it usually started just with one person, and then maybe they gathered another person with them and they'd pray, and it just grew. So just pray that God would turn this nation around. It'd be a wonderful thing to see. So let's go back to, it's important to pray for our leaders. I'm a little discombobulated today. Sorry. That's my big word, my $10 word for today.
When our teacher is doing something wrong, we'll say, did you have your morning coffee today?
I had an afternoon Starbucks because I was sent on the road unexpectedly today. That's why I'm a little discombobulated. But the caffeine has not kicked in. Anyway. So Genesis 41:2, this whole dream sequence starts a little strange, don't you think? Suddenly came up out of the river 7 cows. Does that sound normal?
No.
Sounds a bit odd. Kind of reminds me of Pastor Terry's dreams. One time he had a giant red lobster attacking a town. I think he may have watched too many Godzilla movies. I don't know. He had quite a descriptive, it was color and everything. He had quite a wild dream that night. And maybe that's what's going on with Pharaoh here. He's got cows coming up out of the river.
Ugly and beautiful ones.
Ugly and beautiful ones. It sounds pretty weird, like not even normal, right? At least at first glance, it doesn't sound too normal. So, came up out of the river 7 cows, or kine. Some of your translations will use the word kine, which I looked that up, and it's just another word for cow. I thought maybe it was a particular breed, but I didn't find that. It's just more of an old term for cow. So depending on your translation, you may see kine as the word that's used. But this may not be as unusual as it sounds, because God throughout these dreams is using Egyptian things that the Egyptians are familiar with, right? So for us, we think of the cows we see out in our fields, our pastures, they wouldn't be coming up out of the river, right? So, but what was in Egypt that would come up out of the river, do you think? Do you know of anything that looks like a cow, eats grass like a cow, that lives in a river? Yes! Hippos, hippopotamuses. So maybe they were the river cow, that's what they're kind of known as, the river cow or the hippopotamus. So God's maybe using something that Pharaoh's very familiar with, that it's a hippopotamus that's coming up out of the river. So it's not maybe as unusual as we think. The hippos, these cute little guys.
They are monsters. They can eat an entire watermelon and like 4 chomps.
I wouldn't doubt it. They got big teeth.
Terrifying.
Big teeth. Yeah, I wouldn't want to get bit or chased by them. But these little river cows, little river cows, they tend to stay in the water all day. Because it's hot in Egypt. That's a hot place. They like to stay cool in the river, in the water. They come up out at night majority of the time, and they eat in the grass around the river. They tend to hang out in the marsh areas near the river. So for Pharaoh, him seeing cows come out of the river may have been he was seeing hippopotamuses in his dream come out, because that's what they're used to. That's what they see. So meadow in this interesting wording as well is an Egyptian word that was inserted into the Hebrew text, and it means marsh, grass, reeds, or bulrushes, which also speaks to the whole place that a hippo would sit and eat. But meadow was, the word meadow that was put in this verse was not even a Hebrew word. They didn't even have a word for meadow. This came out of the Egyptian language. So this was something very specific to the Egyptians. So you know what that also reminds me of? Who else did we find in the bulrushes of the Nile River? Moses. Moses was found in his little bitty ark, floating in those little reeds and bulrushes that marsh right by the river. So let's go back to our story. Oh, and another thing I thought about when I was thinking about whether it was cows or hippos, just the description that they were very fat sounds more like a hippo to me, because they're very, very huge and wide, right? But I can't imagine what a skinny one would look like. It would probably be pretty ugly. I should have looked up for a skinny hippo picture. So Genesis 41:3 says, "Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river." Now, I never caught this before when I read this. I guess my mind always goes to the the little skinny cows eating up the fat cows. I kind of skipped a little phrase in here. It says, "and stood by the other cows on the bank." There was there's a pause. They didn't just immediately come up and swallow up the other cows. They stood there for a little bit in the dream. The skinny cows were standing by the fat cows. Now this could, they're standing side by side. Yeah, and I never really noticed that before. And it could be because God was trying to illustrate to Pharaoh that, look at the difference. There's big fat ones and there's skinny ones, making the contrast very obvious to him. Could be why there was a pause in the action, or maybe it's because, as we know, this dream symbolizes the good years of abundance in Egypt of the food supply, and the bad years, the famine. That maybe if you watch how a drought or famine goes into place, you may have supplies on hand. They last a little while, but as time goes by, the supplies run out. The abundance is slowly eaten up. So it may be that that's why there was a pause, because it's not an immediate, you may have 7 good years, as we're going to find out, of abundance, but the first year of famine isn't going to necessarily hurt you. It's as the years go by, suddenly the good years are gone. All the supplies are gone. So maybe that's why that was done that way. So anyway, the problem with that also I had never really thought about in this was the point is made down in verse 19, which we haven't read yet, that the Pharaoh made the point that the cows had such ugliness as he had never seen before, that they were just so ugly. And I started thinking about that. Why was that point made about those second set of cows? It's because famine isn't just famine. It's a very ugly thing. It brings much worse things in society. People are not only just starving to death, but there's extreme medical problems. There's crime on the rise because people are stealing from people. People are killing people for the food. Things get much uglier and worse in society. It's not just the famine. So maybe that's why the cows were so ugly. Maybe God was making a point that it's not going to be an easy time period. It's not going to be like what we see with Charlton Heston or whoever it was, and they let out all the grain to the people and everybody's happy. It's not going to be that way. But anyway, so people aren't just starving. Other forms of ugliness take place. And I said this backwards out of order. See, I'm all discombobulated. Yes, exactly.
It brought out a lot of good, but it brought out a lot of ugly too.
And we're still seeing the ugly come out now as inflation has kicked in. We're now seeing people steal people's U-Haul trucks. I mean, that's just ridiculous. They'd steal someone's whole household, before they're... Yeah, it's easier. You don't have to pack up. So that's their new target. We're going to hit all the people that are moving because they're busy moving. They might leave their truck unattended, and well, there goes their truck. So, and we're seeing gas dealings, and yeah. So it gets very ugly. People get very ugly.
And last week there was two women fighting when the 7-month-old child was caught, and they were fighting at the gas pump.
Oh my gosh.
And then one lady took her car and rammed the other one. And the child wasn't hurt, but
Oh.
they all got arrested.
I think so.
You told me.
Huh?
Donna told me a similar story that she saw.
It's sad. Problems bring out the worst in people. If they think they don't have enough money or food, and I understand the dilemma of not having enough food, but it's the ugly way they go about trying to get their food. The hurt that they do to others to get their food, and it's just sad. So anyway, like I said, I did this out of order. So the two cows were standing side by side was what we saw in verse 3. So let's go back on to Genesis 41:4. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. So he's been startled awake by this. We don't know. God could have made this very descriptive, very visual, very alarming to wake him up, to make it stick in his memory. The scripture doesn't say how bad this was. It's a very simple sentence. But I can imagine God's probably trying to alert Pharaoh, and he's going to make it as vivid as he can to make Pharaoh pay attention. So then he manages to go back to sleep, and he sends him a second dream about the grain. So this is another Egyptian symbol that's very well known and common to the Egyptians, so it makes sense to them. And to have 2 dreams that are so similar, that was probably pretty alarming to Pharaoh as well. To have one bad dream and then to have another bad dream back to back could be pretty upsetting. But that's probably just another way to make it all the more important and stick all the more in Pharaoh's mind. Pay attention to these dreams I'm giving you. I want you to pay attention and remember. So, Egypt is known as the granary of the ancient world. This is why this was a very important symbolism for Pharaoh to pay attention to. Their corn was good, and 7 ears on one stalk was not unusual. This would have made sense to Pharaoh, because he knew his land was very productive because of the Nile River. That Nile River has made a very fertile valley there. So then we see in Genesis 41:6 that we read, then behold, 7 thin heads blighted by the east wind sprang up after them. Now, all throughout the scripture, especially in the Old Testament, you're going to see a reference to the east wind over and over again. And it's always a reference to being something destructive. The up there you'll see Arabia, or Saudi Arabia is what we call it now, is where the Arabian desert is, and that's to the east of Egypt. So the wind, the east hot wind, would come out of the Arabian desert and wash over the Sinai Peninsula into Egypt. And everywhere that east wind went, it caused a lot of destruction because it was just so hot and so devastating. I'm just going to name off like 3 of the scriptures that I found. Exodus 10:13, the east wind blew in and brought the plague of locusts in that story. In Ezekiel 17:10, God said that the east wind will cause what the Israelites plant to wither because of their rebellion to God. So he sent the east wind into Israel to burn up their crops. In Jeremiah 18:17, God was going to scatter them, the Israelites, as with an east wind before their enemies. So he was going to use the wind to play a part in their battle against the enemy.
What was Jeremiah's reference?
18:17. And you can look it up, eastern wind, you'll see it in more places than this.
Huh?
It's right there.
Oh, on the handout I put the 3.
Okay, I was writing it in.
That's okay. So you'll see that in multiple places. That's just a few of them I listed off. So the east wind blows in off the desert and destroys everything in its path. And God used it, like he's used lots of things, to take care of justice, so to speak. So then the thin heads devoured the plump heads, right? And what does it say? And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump full heads. So Pharaoh woke, and indeed it was a dream. And that phrase is put there for a reason, because it indicated that Pharaoh felt that what he had seen was so real that upon awakening he realized it was just a dream. He was so upset by it, he thought it was real, and he had to wake up. Have you ever had a dream like that, where you're left with all the emotions after you wake up, like that was just too intense? This is pretty much where Pharaoh is at. He's wide awake now, shook up by these 2 dreams. It's startled him. It's made him think, what's going on here? So I'm going to stop there tonight. I know it's shorter, but there was too much to go into the next section. We'd be here way longer, so I split the lesson because I didn't think we could do it all tonight. I wanted you to be able to go to bed in a decent So we're going to leave poor Pharaoh all shook up, like Elvis, all shook up. And we'll let Joseph and God take care of him later. We'll settle him down later. So we'll just stop there, okay? So I know that was short, but that was